So I just looked at the clock, and the clock in this room, the clock upstairs, the clock on my computer, none of them agree. Yeah, they have different time. It's kind of like us sentient beings. You know, we all have different ideas about things, just like the clocks. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the homage to great compassion. And this will be taken from Chandrakirti's book, the supplement to Nagarjuna's treatise on the middle way. And it was quite interesting. Instead of, most texts start paying homage to the Buddhas, to the bodhisattvas, to Manjushri, yeah, like that. But this text starts out paying homage to great compassion. And there's great meaning in that, because great compassion is the source of all the Buddhas, all the bodhisattvas, also all the Śrāvakas and solitary realizers. And so as we get into these verses, we'll start to understand why great compassion is so important for everybody's practice. So to review, we talked about some of this in the previous talks. Love is the wish for living beings to have happiness and its causes. Compassion is the wish for them to be free of all dukkha, all unsatisfactory conditions in samsara, and their causes. Okay? Great compassion, yeah, extends to all living beings, because we all have some compassion now. Yeah. But do we have great compassion? You know, do you wish that even the people who harm you or interfere with your happiness, do you wish them to be free of all misery? Or is one part of your mind saying, I want to retaliate and get them back? Okay, that is not compassion. That's anger, grudge holding. It creates negative karma. Okay, so what we're trying to do is recall that the people who harm us, yeah, why do they harm? It's because they're miserable. Yeah, happy people don't harm others. Yeah, they have no reason to. They feel happy. Yeah, so people who harm others are unhappy. Mm-hmm. So isn't somebody who's unhappy somebody who's suffering? Isn't that person worthy of compassion? In other words, worthy of your wish that they be free from whatever misery is afflicting them. Yeah. So it doesn't mean letting people off the hook. Yeah. We still hold people accountable, but without being angry at them. Okay. So compassion is very powerful in this way. And I think that's one of the reasons why it is praised so much in Buddhist texts, and in all religions for that matter. Everybody talks about having compassion, but the great compassion is very vast. Yeah, it doesn't discriminate amongst beings. In other words, everybody has the Buddha nature. Everybody is worthy of compassion. We don't have to earn compassion. Okay, because sometimes we get into this thing of, if I'm going to feel good about somebody, they have to earn it. They have to deserve it. They have to do what I think is good. then I'll wish them well. Yeah. If the Buddha had that kind of compassion, where would we be? Would the Buddha have compassion for us with all of our mess-ups and mistakes and non-virtue? Or would the Buddha just say, hi, everybody, good luck? Yeah. No, what it keeps the Buddha helping us, you know, from since beginningless time and into the future, is that great compassion. And so that's the kind of compassion, because if we want to become a Buddha, we want to generate the qualities that a fully awakened Buddha has. Okay, it's a tall order, yeah, but can you think of anything better to do in your life? Yeah, anything more worthwhile than generating compassion and using that compassion to then practice the path, gain the wisdom that understands reality, and become fully enlightened yourself. Yeah, is there something more valuable in your life to do besides that? If you say get more money, you're wrong. Yeah, because what are you going to do with all that money when you have to leave this life? Yeah, what are you going to do with it? It's going to stay here, you're going to go on. And I don't care how many notes from the bank of hell your relatives burn for you, none of it is going to get to you. Yeah, what we take with us to our next life, yeah, is our karma. And if, karma means action. And so if we direct our mind and create mental actions, contemplating compassion and the kindness of others, that comes with us. These kinds of actions we do are mental habits. Yeah, money, no. Okay, money doesn't even stay with you this life, does it? Yeah, you get your paycheck, by next month, most of it's gone. Maybe all of it's gone. Yeah, so you don't even need to wait until you die for it to desert you. It does it right away. Okay, so let me call up the verses that I want to read you. It came right up. Okay, so remember, these are the first verses in Chandrakirti's text. And the text is divided into 10 chapters that cover the 10 paramitas, the 10 perfections. And the sixth one, which is on developing the wisdom, realizing emptiness, constitutes most of the book. There's some about the first 5, a lot about the 6, and then 7 through 10 are brief. Okay, but this is the homage, the introduction to that text. So I'll read it to you, and then we will go through it line by line, verse by verse. Okay, so Śrāvakas and solitary realizers arise from the excellent sages. The excellent sages are born from bodhisattvas, the mind of compassion, non-dual awareness, and bodhicitta. These are the causes of bodhisattvas. Compassion alone is seen as the seed of a conqueror's rich harvest, as water that nourishes it, and as the ripened fruit that is the source of long enjoyment. Therefore, at the start, I praise this compassion. Like a bucket in a well, migrators have no autonomy. First, with the thought I, they cling to a self. Then, with the thought mine, they become attached to things. I bow to this compassion that cares for migrators. Homage to the compassion for migrators, seen as evanescent and empty of inherent existence, like the reflection of the moon in rippling water. Okay. So, the first lines. Śrāvakas and solitary realizers are born from the excellent sages. The excellent sages are born from bodhisattvas. Okay, so Śrāvakas, that's sometimes translated as hearers, and those are practitioners. They're called hearers because they hear the teachings and then they repeat them to others. And then the solitary realizers are also, let me start over. Śrāvakas and solitary realizers both constitute what we call the fundamental vehicle practitioners. Okay? So, fundamental vehicle is the term His Holiness the Dalai Lama uses to refer to those people who are aspiring to become arhats, who want to get out of cyclic existence. And it's called fundamental because the universal vehicle, the Mahayana, is based on that foundation. Okay? Some people mistakenly think that the fundamental vehicle and the Mahayana are two separate, unrelated kinds of Buddhism. That is not accurate at all. Okay? The Mahayana, the universal vehicle, is based on the teachings in the fundamental vehicle. Okay? So those beings are the Śrāvakas, the hearers, and the solitary realizers. So they're called solitary realizers because some of them in their the last life before they attain arhatship stay alone. They don't live together with other practitioners. Okay, some people use the term Hinayana for these practitioners, and that term is very offensive. And so His Holiness the Dalai Lama does not use it because literally translated it means lesser vehicle. And so for the people who practice that, it's an offensive term. It doesn't create good feelings. And the Dalai Lama really wants Buddhists from all the traditions to respect each other and to practice together. Okay? So, the Śrāvakas and solitary realizers are born from the excellent sages. Excellent sages refers to the Buddha. Okay? How are they born from the excellent sages? Because in order to gain the realizations that lead to arhatship, to liberation from samsara, from the cycle of existence, they have to hear teachings, then contemplate the teachings, and then meditate on the teachings. Those three things, hearing, thinking, and meditating, generate three kinds of wisdom that are important. And we can't skip over this. Some people, they meet Buddhism, or maybe they don't even meet Buddhism. They want to meditate right away. Want to go to a cave you know, a nice, comfortable cave with heating in the winter, aircon in the summer, you know, hot running water, but isolated, and, you know, so that I look like I'm an ascetic practitioner. You know, we want to go do that, but, you know, we haven't even heard the teachings. We don't even know the vocabulary for the teachings. And so, like any field, you know, those of you who are engineers or accountants or whatever field you study, every field has its own vocabulary. So if you want to understand Buddhism, you have to learn the words and the concepts and things. Yeah, so that's why it's important to go to teachings. In ancient times, the teachings were all passed on orally. So that's why they usually call this one hearing. But it could include reading, and it generally means learning and studying, okay? But there is something special about hearing the teachings, because if you hear them together in a group like this, you're together with a live teacher. Yeah, it's different than watching somebody on TV or on the internet. You're with a live teacher, and you're with other practitioners who are living beings. Okay, we're not robots. AI did not generate us. So I don't care how many times, you know, I know some people who have created online a meditation room so that, you know, people can come together and feel like they're meditating with others in this online meditation room. Yes, okay, if you live in Timbuktu and there's no other Buddhists around, yes, that works for you. But otherwise, you should really try and come in person and be with living people. And yeah, so you learn, first step, then you have to think about the teachings. Yeah, so it's not just repeating them, you have to think about them. And not just think about them once or twice, but many times. And some of you may have been to India and seen the Tibetan monks and nuns now debate. Yeah, you see, you know, and they jump around, and especially the monks. The nuns are a little bit more, you know, restrained, but the monks, they're jumping up and down, they're screaming at each other, they call each other names, you know, but it's all done with as a pedagogical tool, an educational tool, so that you check your understanding of the teachings you've heard by debating them, okay? You know, and this is important. We may not debate, but we discuss. Yeah, yeah, some people don't like debate so much, but we discuss the teachings. And that serves the purpose of really refining our understanding to make sure that before we meditate, we understand what in the world we're meditating on and how to meditate on it. Yeah. Otherwise, you know, people close their eyes or roll their eyes back. You know, that's a good way to get a headache. Uh, you know, and kind of look holy, going like this. You know, and they think, oh, you know, now I'm practicing the Dharma. They're not. Yeah, you have to hear the teachings and have a correct understanding. Then you meditate. Meditation comes from the same verbal root as to familiarize. Yeah, so you're really familiarizing yourself with the teachings again and again and again. And by doing that, the meaning of the teachings becomes part of you, and your mind gets transformed into what the Buddha is teaching. And that's, you know, how we gain realizations. Okay? So these people are born from the Buddhas because they need to hear teachings from the Buddhas. Yeah? who explain to them the path, explain what all the different qualities are that they have to generate, in their case to become arahats, explain what to abandon when you practice the Dharma, so that people know, what do I practice? What do I abandon? You have to know that. Otherwise, you don't know what to do. Yeah. And your own mind says, oh, what do I feel like practicing? Oh, I think I'll sit and daydream. Yeah, no, that's not practicing Dharma, Or I'll abandon, what do I abandon? Oh, I'll abandon all the people I don't like. No, that's not the point either, okay? So these two words, what to practice and what to abandon, you'll hear them very often in the teachings. And we have to know that. And the only way we learn that is from studying from somebody else. Yeah. And the Buddha is the originator of the teachings in our day and age. So we go back to the Buddha's teachings and somebody teaches us these. Okay? So that's how the Śrāvakas and solitary realizers are born. They depend on the Buddhas and the Buddha's teachings. Then the next line, that the excellent sages, in other words, the Buddhas, are born from bodhisattvas. Okay, what are bodhisattvas? These are beings who have generated bodhicitta. What is bodhicitta? It's the aspiration to become a fully awakened Buddha because we want to have the full wisdom, compassion, power, skillful means to be of the greatest benefit to all living beings. Okay? So the Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas. Now this can be in two ways. Yeah, one way is that there's somebody who's a bodhisattva who has generated uncontrived, unfabricated bodhicitta. In other words, they really feel it, and they don't have to sit there and think, okay, let's see, I want to be nice to this person. And they don't have to think about it. They're so familiar that whenever they think of any living being, the thought that comes in their mind is, I want to become a Buddha to be able to benefit that person most effectively. Okay, so the bodhisattvas are people aspiring to be Buddhas. So in one way, the Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas because there's a bodhisattva and they're practicing the path, and as they practice the path and gain the realizations, especially realizing the nature of reality, emptiness, then they're able to cleanse their mind of all defilements, and when their mind is perfectly purified, then that bodhisattva becomes a Buddha. Okay, that is what we are going to do someday. We don't know when, but we have that nature. And so someday we will get it together and practice well and be able to become a bodhisattva, and through then continuing practice, cleansing the mind, developing the good qualities, we will become a Buddha. So, and that's one way that Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas. So there, the bodhisattva and the Buddha are the same mental continuum. Okay? They're not the same person, because a bodhisattva is one person, a Buddha is another person, but they're in the same mental continuum. So as that mental continuum is purified, as it develops more qualities, then it becomes the mental continuum of a Buddha. Okay? So that's one way. Another way a Buddha can be born from a bodhisattva is if it's, let's say there's two bodhisattvas who are really good friends. okay? Or there's, let's take the example of a senior bodhisattva and a junior bodhisattva, yeah? So the bodhisattva who's senior, who is more advanced, teaches the junior bodhisattva, and by hearing the teachings and thinking about them, meditating on them, that bodhisattva purifies their minds, gains the realizations, and that bodhisattva becomes a Buddha. So in this case, you have your two bodhisattvas. This one teaches this one, then this one practices and becomes a Buddha. So here, this one's practicing, and becoming a Buddha comes because this bodhisattva taught them, okay? But this one is the one that becomes the Buddha here. So in that case, that Buddha came from a bodhisattva, but that bodhisattva wasn't in the same mental continuum. It was a different person. So that's another way that we say the Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas. Okay? Then, okay, now we're getting into good stuff. Okay, the next two lines says, the mind of compassion, non-dual awareness, and bodhicitta, these are the causes of bodhisattvas. So these are the three principal causes of bodhisattvas: compassion, non-dual awareness, and bodhicitta. Okay, now, that's a nice, okay. My screen went blank, but it decided to come back. Yeah, I think my computer has a mind of its own, and it's not AI, but it does all sorts of things that I don't tell it to do. Yeah. Okay. So the mind of compassion, how is that a cause of bodhisattvas? Okay, well, to become a bodhisattva, you need the uncontrived bodhicitta, yeah? And great compassion is the principal cause of that bodhicitta, yeah? Without great compassion that extends to all living beings, including mosquitoes and cockroaches and dragons and ghosts and whatever kind of living being there are. I don't know about those last ones, but, it includes all living beings, wanting them to be free, yeah, of misery. So you want yourself to be free of samsara, and you want all other beings to also be free of samsara, yeah? So that's the great compassion. That is the principal cause of bodhicitta. How do you generate that great compassion? There's two ways in Tibetan Buddhism. One is the 7-point instruction of cause and effect. I think most of you, some of you, have heard it before. Okay, so seeing all sentient beings have been our mother, remembering the kindness of our mother, wanting to repay that kindness, heartwarming love, compassion, the great resolve, and then bodhicitta. Okay, so that's one way. The second way to develop bodhicitta is through a way taught by Shantideva, which I'll be going into on the teachings Thursday and Friday night, yeah? So that way is equalizing and exchanging self for others. And that's a very, very, it's a fantastic teaching that really challenges ourselves, asking us to care more about others even than we care about ourselves. Because, as His Holiness says, if you want to be happy yourself, you care about your own happiness, the best way is to cherish others. Okay, so those are the two ways to generate bodhicitta. So along the way, you generate compassion, then you have the determination to really act on your compassion, and that becomes the aspiration to become fully awakened, so that you have the abilities really to perfectly lead other living beings to awakening. Yeah, this is quite a high realization, huh? So, and it's not for wimps. We have to have a lot of internal courage and determination. But it's also the best thing to do with our lives. There is nothing better than that to do in our lives. Okay, so compassion is a cause of bodhisattvas. That's okay. Second one, non-dual awareness. Okay. Now, when we hear non-dual awareness, most of us, our mind thinks of the direct realization of emptiness, because when you realize the lack of inherent existence, that directly, non-conceptually, the mind, directly sees emptiness, okay? And there's no feeling of subject, me, and emptiness, the object, in that realization. In other words, the mind has realized its own ultimate nature and is fused with that ultimate nature, the realization. Okay, so that's what we usually think of non-dual awareness. Now, the problem with saying that that is the cause of a bodhisattva is that, when you study the Lamrim and the paths and stages, it usually goes first you develop bodhicitta and become a bodhisattva, then you practice the 6 perfections, and the 6th perfection is the one of the ultimate nature, emptiness. But wait a minute, how can that be the cause of bodhisattvas if you practice it after you've become a bodhisattva? Because causes always have to come before the result. So here, when it says non-dual awareness, here the non-dual is a mind that understands emptiness conceptually. It's an inferential cognition of emptiness. And it sees that things are neither inherently existent nor non-existent. In other words, the two extremes that people, meaning us, fall to. Either we think, yes, everything has its own inherent nature, it exists the way I see it, it's objective out there, and even when I think of myself, there's something that's really me, a real person in here. Okay, so that is what we call absolutism, or sometimes it's translated eternalism. It means grasping at inherent existence. But when some people meditate on emptiness, if they don't have a lot of merit, if they haven't studied about emptiness seriously, and they don't have a correct understanding of it, when they negate inherent existence, then they jump clear over here to the other extreme and say, nothing exists at all. Okay, I don't exist, you don't exist, I can do anything I want because there's not such a thing as karma. And then a person who has that nihilistic view, instead of becoming a Buddha, lower realms for a long time. Okay, why? Because when you think nothing exists, then, well, there's, why should I keep good ethical conduct? It doesn't exist. Yeah? And so they just give themselves permission to do all sorts of obnoxious, non-virtuous things. So those two things, absolutism, grasping an inherent existence, nihilism, thinking, nothing exists. Those are the two extremes. So here, when it talks about non-dual awareness, those are the two dual things that are missing: the absolutism and the nihilism. In other words, people have the middle way, yeah? And the middle way view is the correct view, okay? Now I have to just comment on the term middle way, because sometimes, if you study, when you study math, yeah, you have this number, you add them up, cut them in half, and that's the middle, okay? Yeah, so we think, okay, well, we add together absolutism and nihilism, cut them in half, and that's the middle view. No, that's just another kind of ignorance and confusion, okay? So the middle view means that you're free from those two extremes. Yeah, it's not that you put those two extremes together and cut the total in half. Okay, but the question is, okay, this non-dual awareness, and even a conceptual understanding of emptiness, many people don't get that until, let's say, the second path, the path of preparation, because they immediately cultivate on the first path, the path of accumulation, and when they have the union of serenity and insight of vipassana and shamatha on emptiness, then they enter the second path, the path of preparation. Okay, but here, again, to be the cause of bodhisattvas, the path of accumulation is the first path. So how can this be a cause of it if they realize it later? Okay, here, what it means is they're talking about what is called the sharp faculty disciples, okay? So sharp faculty disciples are the ones that are intelligent, most intelligent. Intelligence in Dharma has nothing to do with your O levels and A levels and your grades in school, okay? Somebody can be a brilliant, astrophysicist and be totally ignorant when it comes to understanding the Dharma. Okay, so here, the sharp faculty disciples, the ones who are really intelligent in the Dharma, before they generate bodhicitta, before they make the commitment to attain awakening in order to liberate all living beings, before that, they want to know that attaining awakening or enlightenment is possible. Yeah, they don't just take that on blind belief because the Buddha said so. Yeah, they want to know, explain to me how that is done. Yeah. Okay, so what they study and what they realize and what becomes their non-dual awareness is they're able to see that, well, we can start in our own lives. Yeah. Would you say that greed, anger, jealousy, arrogance are qualities to be developed or qualities to abandon? Abandon. Okay. Now, what is the root of those? Yeah, when our mind is involved with incredible greed, who are we thinking about the most? Ourselves. When we're angry, who are we thinking about? Me. When we're jealous, when we're arrogant, when we're lazy, when we have no conscience, it's all about me. Yeah. So it's all based on a misconception of who we are. Okay. In other words, we think that we are one real person, that there's a real person in here somewhere, we're not sure where, but there's something that is who I really am, an essence. Okay? When we search for that essence and try and figure out what it is, it's very difficult to come up with something, because it's either got to be one of our aggregates, some part of our body and mind, or it's got to be something separate from our body and mind. Okay? When we look, am I my body? Are you your body? Which body? If you are your body, which body? The body when you were an infant? When you were a toddler? Yeah, when you went to school? When you were a teenager? Which body is you? You can't identify one. Is there a part of the body that's you? Is your brain you? Yeah. If you saw somebody's brain on the table, and let's say you were really fond of somebody, yeah, and their brain's on the table, would you go, oh, I love you so much? Yeah. Oh, those gray folds are so fantastic. I just swoon when I see them. I love you, and you go to hug that person's brain. Is their brain the person? And do you want to hug somebody's brain? You'd probably go, yeah, Okay, so we're not our brain. Are we our mind? Which mind? The awake mind, the sleeping mind, the happy mind, the unhappy mind, the mind of generosity, the mind with stinginess. We can't identify one mental state and say, that's who I am. Okay, so when we can realize the lack of some kind of self-sustaining essence, inherently existent essence, yeah, then when we realize the absence of that, then that means that our grasping at our own self as some inherently existent person ceases. And that ignorance that thought we were some real person there, that ignorance ceases. When that ignorance ceases, then all of the mental afflictions that come out of it, greed, clinging attachment, holding grudges, lack of integrity, spite, malice, all these kinds of things that are rooted in ignorance, then they also crumble and fall apart. Okay, so when somebody, before they become a bodhisattva, can, a sharp faculty disciple, when they can realize that, yeah, then they know that awakening is possible, because the root of all of our obscurations is that ignorance, its seeds and its latencies. when we realize emptiness, we can eliminate the ignorance, the seeds of ignorance, the latencies of ignorance, and become a Buddha. Okay, are you getting the sequence that I was doing? Yeah? So when we realize that the object that ignorance holds on to does not exist, then ignorance disappears, because ignorance thinks, yeah, there's a real me. Everything around here has its own inherent nature. When you realize that it doesn't, that ignorance ceases. Yeah? When that ignorance ceases, all the other defilements are gradually overcome by that wisdom, and then enlightenment can be attained. Yeah? So here, when we say the non-dual wisdom, it's the wisdom of a sharp faculty person before they generate bodhicitta, who has a correct view of the nature of reality and knows that awakening is possible. Because of that, then that person says, okay, now I can generate full bodhicitta, take the actual bodhisattva vow, not just the similitude that most of us take. And I'm going to be on that path and actualize Buddhahood. So that's how the non-dual awareness becomes a cause of bodhisattvas. Okay, you're going to have to maybe listen to the tape and go through this. It takes some contemplation. Okay, the other cause that it says, the mind of compassion, non-dual awareness, and bodhicitta, these are the causes of bodhisattvas. Well, wait a minute. How is bodhicitta a cause of a bodhisattva because the demarcation of becoming a bodhisattva is when we generate uncontrived, spontaneous bodhicitta. So becoming a bodhisattva and generating uncontrived bodhicitta happen at the same time. But how can that be if that bodhicitta is the cause of becoming a bodhisattva? Because causes always have to come before the results. The result is becoming a bodhisattva. Bodhicitta is the cause. Okay, so how in the world does that work? So here, how it works. So you see, this is why you need teachings on it, because if you just read the verse, you go, this doesn't make sense. But, if you get an explanation. Okay, so here how this works is they give the analogy of, and this is an analogy from India, In India, one of the big crops is sugarcane. So there's a big difference in the sweetness between the inside of the sugarcane and the bark of the sugarcane. Okay, have you ever seen sugarcane grow, So the bark is a little sweet, but it's nothing like what's inside. Yeah. So in a similar way, the general idea, contrived bodhicitta, fabricated bodhicitta, what we do, like at the beginning of the teachings today when we generated bodhicitta, that is like the sugar cane bark. And then spontaneous bodhicitta, when that arises whenever we see any living being and say, I want to get awakened to lead that being, because you have so much compassion for that being. Yeah, that is like the actual bodhicitta. So here, when it's talking about the bodhicitta, that's the cause of becoming a bodhisattva, it's referring to the bodhicitta the contrived bodhicitta, that is like sugar cane bark. Yeah, because it is the cause of the spontaneous bodhicitta that is like the inside of the sugar cane. Okay? So all of that was an explanation about 2 lines. Okay? Let's go on here. Okay, next lines. Okay, this verse is really beautiful. Compassion alone is seen as the seed of a conqueror's rich harvest, as water that nourishes it, and as the ripened fruit that is the source of long enjoyment. Therefore, at the start, I praise compassion, says Chandrakirti. Okay, so compassion is being singled out here in 3 analogies. It's a seed, it's water, and it is the ripened fruit of a harvest. Okay, so before we generate bodhicitta, to get us going on the path, compassion is like the seed. When we generate compassion, our heart begins to soften. It begins to open. We begin to see possibilities in our own life and in the lives of other beings that we didn't see before. Before you met the Dharma and started to hear about compassion, yeah, and then after you met the Dharma and you've started to hear about compassion, has there been a shift in your mind? Yeah, and the way you feel about other living beings? Maybe you don't have great compassion, but like, wow, compassion is important. That's something I want to develop. Yeah, so that's the seed. Yeah, it's the seed here of full Buddhahood. Yeah. So with that seed, in order to sprout, it needs to be watered. Yeah. If a seed isn't watered, if it's not fertilized, it's going to sit there in the ground and it might even rot and disappear. Okay. So what waters that initial seed of compassion? What waters it is our continual practice of compassion, our familiarization again and again and again with meditating on compassion. So it's in that way that compassion acts as the water, the fertilizer, so that when we're on the path, as we're practicing the Dharma, as we're studying, contemplating, and meditating, this is all supported by compassion. Yeah. In the great vehicle, the Mahayana, this is what sustains us in our lives as we go through all the ups and downs of practicing Dharma. Do you go through ups and downs? Yeah? Even you're not practicing Dharma, you go through ups and downs, right? Yeah? It's like one day, oh yes, I understand why samsara is to be abandoned. Yes, I've got that. Then the next day, oh, I want to go to the movies and I want to see my boyfriend and I want to eat some good food and, I really care about what people think of me. And we went from, I want to become a Buddha to I want my worldly pleasure, which is the opposite way to go if you want Buddhahood. Buddhahood is going one way, clinging on to our worldly pleasure is going the other way. It's going, we want to be on a one-way street. The 8 worldly concerns, it's going the wrong way on that street. Okay, So that's why we need compassion. You know, when you're practicing the path, you know, you're really doing your best. But, you know, maybe one morning, well, maybe not one morning, maybe many mornings, the alarm goes off and you go, I want to sleep later. Turn off the alarm, go back to sleep. I'll do my morning practice tomorrow morning. Yeah. And tomorrow morning, the alarm goes off. Oh, I don't feel like it. And go back to sleep, turn off the alarm, you sleep again. Does your practice ever get done? No. Do you get out of samsara? No. Yeah. Can you help other beings, you know, by the force of your own compassion? No. Okay. Are you stuck? Yes. Okay. So compassion, you know, at this point, it, you know, it kind of keeps us going. It's like, okay, I want to sleep late. But you know, in Syria, there's a big mess right now. Yeah, the government just fell. The rebels are in charge. Nobody knows what's going on. You know, those people are suffering. Even in my own country, yeah, we have good medical care. You know, Singapore, you have good medical care. But people are dying today in the hospitals that even give good medical care. You know? There are people who are sick. There are little kids who want to learn, but, you know, in many places there aren't the teachers to teach them, or there aren't even the schools, you know, or maybe there's a school and it's, you know, they're sitting on the floor and they're, you know, writing on slates. They don't even have all the fancy textbooks and things that we have. So, you know, you want to go back to sleep, but then you think, you know, there's all these people in the world who want to be happy, and they've been kind to me in my previous lives. Yeah. And I generated that wish to be able to benefit them. And now, you know, all I want to do is I keep wanting to go back to sleep in the morning. You know, so I got to get myself revved up in the morning. You know, I can't just continue, you know, blah with the alarm and go back to sleep and wake up at who knows what hour. You know, but I care about those people, and I need to get up and do my practice. Yeah, and so that motivates you to get up and do your practice. Yeah, you seeing what I mean? Yeah. And so it's in that way that compassion is like the water for that initial seed that gets us going. It keeps us going, you know. And then sometimes when we're on the path, we get sick or we don't understand something. We're studying the Dharma and, you know, you read something and like, oh, I don't get this, you know, and you just feel like, ugh, you know, give up. I want to go watch cartoons. You know, I can understand cartoons. I can't understand this text. And you just want to, you know, throw it down and forget about it. Or you're trying to be compassionate and help somebody, and that person tells you to flake off and mind your own business. And you go, oh, I'm trying to help, and you know, I want to help these people, and they don't even want help, and they're pushing me away, you know, and you get really discouraged, like, oh, it's just not worth it. Yeah. So all these kinds of things are obstacles that we can encounter when we're on the path. But if we, you know, our compassion is getting nourished, and sustained and cultivated, it is a huge help for getting us over these bumps on the path. Yeah, because you think, I really care about people. I want to do something worthwhile in my life. And okay, I feel like going back to sleep, but you know, it's not really that hard to get up in the morning. It really isn't. You get up for work, don't you? Yeah. You don't on weekdays or whenever, your shift is, you're sleeping. You don't just turn the alarm clock off and go back to sleep. You get up and go to work, even though you're tired. Why? What are you seeking? It starts with an M. Okay. You can't, you'll get up to go to work and even do a job you don't like to get money. And money you can't take with you. Comes, comes, goes, goes. Yeah. Practicing the path, getting some realizations, creating virtuous karma, that you can take with you. So if you get up for money, why don't you get up for the path to awakening? Yeah? Okay. Then your mind says, it's too hard. It takes too long. I was recently at a teaching by Song Rinpoche, the current Song Rinpoche. His previous life was one of my teachers. So the present one is too. But at this teaching, so many people in the Q&A sessions were saying to Rinpoche, it takes so long to become a Buddha, at least 3 countless great eons. I want to do it. I don't want to spend that long. And it's also hard. At some point on the path, I have to be willing to give my body, I don't want to do that. Huh? And you say, this whole thing, it's like, it's too much, And I really tried to help that person. I just tried to help them move something, and they said, no, I couldn't help them. Oh, they won't accept help for anything. Oh, these sentient beings. And then they get mad at me and tell me to mind my own business. Yeah. So you get like that, yeah. So this is where compassion comes in. If we come back to compassion, it's like, oh, no, sentient beings have been kind to me. I care about them. I depend on them. I want to benefit them. I live in a world together with so many other sentient beings. I want to do at least some small thing, to practice the path and be of worldly, be of benefit to them. So you get out of bed, yeah, and you do your practice. If you can do it for money, which is not a good motivation, then you can do it to become a Buddha, which is a good motivation. Okay? Yeah. Nobody's going to pay you to become a Buddha. Yeah. But if you become a Buddha, you're not going to have any money problems. Okay? It's because a Buddha is rich in a total other way and doesn't need money to be happy. Okay. Computer's going to sleep, and I just looked at the clock. We're running out of time. Okay. So it's as compassion alone is seen as the seed of a conqueror's rich harvest, as water that nourishes it, and as the ripened fruit that is the source of long enjoyment. So the ripened fruit that is the source of long enjoyment is the state of awakening. And the fruit, we don't just, get, attain awakening and saying, okay, I did that, bye everybody. I'm going to stay in my own nirvana and forget you because you're so troublesome. Yeah, good luck. I hope you get enlightened someday. Uh, no, a Buddha just, the fruit of Buddhahood is they're consistently, without effort, totally effortless, manifesting in all the different ways that sentient beings can learn from them and all the different ways that they can benefit sentient beings. So that's the fruit that we get. You start out with the seed, you water it, and then you have that fruit. And then you have all of the enlightening activities that the Buddha can do. You have attained the three, or sometimes it's divided into four bodies or kayas of the Buddha. So you can manifest so many different forms according to the disposition, the interests, the abilities of different sentient beings. Okay, so that is the ripened fruit that is the source of long enjoyment. Therefore, at the start of this text, Chandrakirti says, I praise compassion. Okay, now we're going to have to end. Oh, we aren't even at. Yeah, there's two big verses that have a lot to them. We're doing, yeah, this isn't the last teaching here. It is? Well, we'll figure out something, okay? Don't ask me what. Yeah, yeah, don't ask me what. Oh, you feel okay? Nice computer, don't break on me. Yeah, we'll figure something out. Okay, we'll contemplate it. Yeah, maybe because I'm teaching at Pure Land over the weekend, so maybe I can finish it there. And yeah. Anyway, a few minutes for questions and comments.
Venerable, may I check with you? You mentioned non-dual awareness in this verse says it's free from the two extremes.
Yes.
So that explains the non-dual part, right?
Yeah.
Then the awareness part is
the understanding.
But this is conceptual.
Yeah, it's conceptual, but it's your mental consciousness understanding that.
If I could just follow up with another question. You also mentioned this mental continuum that's.
Yeah.
And then in our daily life, as just now you gave an example, some days we have ups and downs. So the mental continuum actually goes, like it progresses and then it backtracks. It's like a mess, right? Because it doesn't go linearly.
When we say mental continuum, we're talking about one moment of consciousness after another moment of consciousness. So that always goes forward in time. But, as we know from our life, sometimes our mind is clear, sometimes it's foggy. We have all different sorts of mental states. So in this mental continuum, one moment of consciousness after the other, some days we feel, enthusiastic, some days we don't, some days, you know, we feel creative, some days we don't. So it's that way that we go up and down, okay? But it's one moment of consciousness after the other. It's like a river. Our mind is like a river, okay? So it's like the canal, you know, here, except, well, maybe our mind is as dirty as that canal, you know, with as much rubbish floating in it sometimes, okay? But, you know, so the canal, the water is flowing forward, 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 and eventually it gets to the sea. So our mind stream is going forward, but whether our mind stream is enriched by wisdom and compassion depends on the effort that we are putting into hearing, thinking, and meditating.
Venerable, on the note of dual view, and sometimes we use object and subject, which is, I cannot put it together with the non-absolutism and the nihilism, because object-subject is relative position.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if, let's say, my Vajra brother here is moving towards me, he's my subject, I'm his object, because in his way, he's coming towards me. But let's say we all face one direction, then we don't have that object-subject relationship anymore, and we are facing one direction.
Yeah. Here, it's not exactly like that. Here, it's the object, let's say my eye consciousness, and visual form. I'm seeing the yellow on the table. That's the object. The visual consciousness is the subject. In the realization of emptiness, you have the mental consciousness of wisdom and the object emptiness. Yeah. But when you have the direct perception, there isn't this feeling of subject and object. Okay, that's what non-dual means in that case. Okay, it's hard to imagine having a consciousness where there's not this feeling of subject and object, but at that time of non-dual awareness with a directly perceiving consciousness, there's not that feeling of subject and object. But here, when it says non-dual, it means not the two extremes of absolutism and nihilism. Okay.
Hello, Venerable. I'd like to ask about the first verse, which is the Śrāvakas comes from Buddhas, and Buddhas come from bodhisattvas. So it seems that there's a like the causes and effects are sort of subverted in a way.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why it is put in this way? I'd like to know. Thank you.
I think the reason why it's, you know, to show both all of them, the Śrāvakas, the solitary realizers, the bodhisattvas, all come from Buddhas in the sense that everybody has to learn from a Buddha. But here, you know, why is it done in this way? I think because it's pointing at the importance of compassion and bodhicitta for both for all of them, for all three of them, the Śrāvakas, the solitary realizers, and the bodhisattvas, that all of them depend on great compassion. Yeah, because this is the homage to great compassion, so he's showing in that kind of way. Yeah.
Sorry, just a very small clarification, if it's possible. The phrase about the mind of compassion, non-dual awareness, and then bodhicitta, is it right to say that it's written like that because you need to first develop mind of compassion, then you can develop non-dual awareness, and then you can develop bodhicitta?
The compassion would definitely be the first, okay? For a sharp faculty bodhicitta, bodhisattva, you know, they may have some of the compassion, like the sugar bark, sugar cane bark, first, but probably they would have the non-dual awareness Yeah, because the non-dual awareness gives them the umph, the wish to really generate bodhicitta. So they would like increase, even if they had the bodhicitta like sugarcane bark, they would increase it due to knowing that awakening is possible.
Then you mentioned like sharp faculty bodhisattva. What if it's like a dull faculty one?
Okay, yeah. So the modest faculty bodhisattva.
Modest faculty, sorry.
Yeah, okay. The rest of us who are dum-dums.
Me included, everybody.
Yeah. I'm speaking for myself, I'm not insulting you. Yeah, for people like me who are dum-dums. Okay, then we would generate compassion, use that to have the bodhicitta like sugarcane bark. We would learn something about emptiness, but we wouldn't have the complete correct view yet. We would learn something would stick. Yeah, I kind of get it some days. Some days, I don't know, it feels like everything's very solid and real, and but by the force of that compassion, then the sugarcane, the bodhicitta, like sugarcane bark, would become the actual sugarcane, bodhicitta like actual sugarcane, and that person would enter the path of accumulation, the first path. And all the while they would be meditating on emptiness, but on the path of accumulation, then they would probably get, when they got the conceptual realization, then that would bump them up to the path of preparation from the path of accumulation. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Venerable, we have time for one last one. There's one sister at the back.
Okay. I talked about compassion. I better be that way. Oh, but I'm so tired now.
Venerable, what is that visual consciousness?
The visual consciousness is the part of your mind that sees colors and shapes. Okay? So when you open your eyes and you see colors and those colors are in shapes, that's your visual consciousness that's seeing it. Yeah, when you hear sounds, then that's your auditory consciousness that is hearing the sounds. Okay, and so on for the other senses.